BSides DC would like to thank all of our sponsors, and a special thank you to all of our speakers, volunteers, and organizers for making 2018 a success.
All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming to my talk. My name is Craig Chamberlain. This is my second BSides as a speaker, not my first as an attendee. And this talk is about fighting security inflation with open source tools. And I feel a lot of material, so I'm going to dive right in. My background is I've been doing security analytics for a long time. Worked on about half a dozen large-scale security analytics projects. Some of them were products that you may use. Some of them were private. The reason I started down this road is that a few years ago, I was working on a large web property, and I found that one of the biggest problems that we had is what I like to call inflation fatigue. Simply because security is being taken a lot more seriously, which is good for us, but it's also becoming much more expensive. And at the same time, it's becoming more expensive in a number of dimensions. The cost of talent is inflating to historic levels. As you can see, anybody with more than a year of experience can probably easily find a number of jobs here at the conference even, because the competition for talent is becoming so intense. The cost of security tools and products is inflating at the same time because we're paying higher prices for these because they're becoming more and more essential. And all of this, my thesis is that all of this inflation is not only a problem from the perspective of the business leaders, but it's becoming a problem for us as well because it actually starts to degrade our attention and our focus and doesn't help our mission and of doing security in the process. Now, just a little bit of background. In terms of why did we do large-scale logging and monitoring and security analytics? Well, the short reason is that it's required by a number of standards. So if anybody has to undergo healthcare audits and certifications, it's required by those. It's required by things like the SOC 2 series and the PCI certification. It's required by NIST 800. If anybody's doing NIST 800, it's required. And in fact, even OWASP last year added a line item to the top 10 called insufficient logging and monitoring. So even OWASP is emphasizing the importance of logging and monitoring. So we set about to do this at great scale. So the story is, it's a fairly typical story. I think a lot of us have lived through this. So senior security person, you go into a new organization and you find that security upgrades are needed, that more needs to be done in a number of areas, one of which is logging, monitoring, detection, and analytics. So in my case, I set about to do this, and I found that I was able to build a really strong coalition with my audit and compliance department because they had requirements. They had all these alphabet soup requirements, and we had customer requirements as well, and they actually had some money to fund these requirements. My team had experience and skills to actually do the work. So we set about working together to try to solve this. So we got together one day and said, look, InfoSec has about $600,000-700,000 in budget for doing really large-scale logging and monitoring and detection and security analytics. So let's just do it. So we set about to see what we could do. But it turned out we didn't have enough money. We didn't have nearly enough money to do this at the scale we were trying to do, which is I'll go into. So. In terms of where we spent our time, the reason that security inflation and what I call product sprawl, which I'll define, became such a problem is that these were kind of the core work streams in terms of these are the work streams that security needed to be doing that were relatively high value. So customer conversations, security product management, governance, risk, and compliance, obviously working with audit and InfoSec. And then there are engineering work streams. There's a whole other set of engineering work streams about security development lifecycles and architecture and product security response. And one of those is tool selection. One of those is security tools, which has a number of work streams like selection and purchasing and operations. And then finally, there's one that I call evangelism. And this is one that sometimes it's hard to make time for this, but I think it's actually one of the more important work streams because as I talk to business leaders in my current role and in the past, I find that evangelism is one of the most important things that we need to be doing just because there are so many misconceptions about security and about how security works and what it does. And this is a large work stream and it's hard to make time for it, but it's actually really important because, for one, the business is never going to learn to speak our language. For the most part, they're never going to learn to speak security and come understand the way, understand us talking in our native language, talking about how we talk to each other. We really have to learn to talk to them. And two, because there's a lot of misconceptions about security. Even though that there's much more awareness of security problem sets these days, there's a lot of misconceptions. And this is, I think, it's not so much because people don't, it's not because people don't care about security or they're trying to do the wrong thing. It's just because there's so much confusion. And there's, in the final analysis, security is a tax from the perspective of the business. It's largely a tax. It doesn't generate revenue with few exceptions. It doesn't actually boost the alpha or the bottom line to a significant extent, apart from doing what you need to do to get deals done. So the business leaders are always going to find a way to try to find shortcuts, not because they don't care about security, but because they're trying to get their work done and ship products. So they're trying to find shortcuts in all problem sets, not just security. So in terms of where we spend our time, so the problem was, if you look at this, this is kind of a comparison between two models. So on the left, I found we were spending about 1/3 of our time on security tools and products between selection, evaluation, purchasing, operationalization, if that's a word, and we're spending way too much time on just buying and operating security products, which left us very little time for evangelism in terms of educating the business, exploring assumptions, exploring why we need to do security this way versus that, what the risks are to the business, how we need to address them, the fact that we can't just buy security in a box. That's a work stream that is really hard to time box. It takes as long as it takes to talk through these kinds of misconceptions and do these kinds of educational efforts and outreach. And if you get into this kind of a feedback loop where we're spending more and more time on just keeping the lights on, keeping the tools and the products and the operational environment running, and doing the core security work streams, if we don't have enough time for evangelism, then we don't have the time to have a meaningful dialogue with the business about what we need to do and how we do it better, then it can be really hard to get out of this loop. Kind of end up stuck in a loop where you spend all of your time on this operational stuff and you don't have any time to talk about actually trying to make things better. So in terms of the tool work streams, this was what the tool work streams consisted of. It was everything from evaluation of tools and products to proving proof of concepts to selling and evangelizing, proving business value and selling the concept of business value to stakeholders and allocating budget in order to buy tools at great cost. And this is the work stream that, because this, where this leads to is this led to spending a lot of time in meetings and more time in meetings just talking about the process of which tools are we going to buy, which products are we going to buy and services, and how much is it going to cost, and who's going to pay for it. And so that led to us, there were times when we could spend almost 1/3 of our time was spent in the tool work streams between selection, purchasing, deployment, operationalization, which is a word I'm making up, and just kind of babysitting tools and products and services at great scale. So this led to what I call product sprawl, which is where, and I see this, I feel like I see this everywhere I've been in the last 4 years. The more money an organization has, the richer it is, the more of this you see where security teams have more and more products. They kind of go on a buying spree. And so you go to conferences and you come back with a set of new products every year. And eventually the security team breaks out into groups like architecture and operations. And it grows because the security team spends more and more of its time just installing and managing and administrating and operating and troubleshooting products and managing fleets of security products, which takes time away from our core mission of actually doing security engineering, architecture, risk management, et cetera. And so I feel like this is actually a drag on our productivity, and it's actually a risk to our success. As we spend more and more time on this operational stuff and just product maintenance, it becomes an actual risk to success in our mission. So I wanted to get rid of that. So we set about taking a look at what an alternative world would look like. So this is a cost comparison we worked up. We were looking at So in our case, we're operating a fleet of roughly 20,000, give or take 1,000, 20,000 servers in an AWS environment, one of the largest. And in order to instrument those with 2 security agents, in order to meet various requirements, 1 intrusion detection agent, 1 endpoint detection and response agent to catch things that the IDS agent didn't see, and to do other things, it was going to cost almost $4 million in spend. Between that and the cost of ingesting several terabytes, almost a terabyte per day of log data into a large-scale data analytics product, we were looking at a burn between 3 and 4 million a year. And obviously that led to a significant conversation that was hard to get past with the business, because that price tag is so large that the business would just have sticker shock. So looking at open source alternatives, we realized that we could replace all this with open source tools, and I'll show you what that looks like, what that model looks like. And now the operational cost doesn't go away. There's still compute, storage, and operations, because somebody has to build and run all this. But we estimated it would be about roughly 10% of the cost of doing this with commercial products. And on top of that, we have the cost of headcount. So we're looking at numbers that were large enough that it became just a block, an obstacle that we couldn't get past at times. Because between the tools cost and the headcount cost, now we're talking about trying to take budget away from flagship products that produce revenue and generate happy customers. And that's, it's really hard to compete for dollars. For things like security initiatives, it can be difficult sometimes, or challenging to ask for budget numbers in these ranges unless you can build a really compelling business case, which sometimes you can do. But even if we were horribly wrong about our cost projections, even if our cost projections were off by half, even if we're, say, the cost of DIY or do-it-yourself is up around $750,000, it's still a massive decrease and a massive savings from as you can see here, it's still a massive decrease from the model of using commercial products and services that we're looking at. And this was just to get started with the first set of requirements. So the great thing now is, what we found is that going in an alternative direction like this, the great thing is now the business is actually interested. And the business is really interested in talking to us now. And they're actually happy to talk to security, which is something that can be hard to get to. But if you're talking about 80 to 90% cost reductions with possibly equal or better outcomes, now you've got a much more interested set of business leaders. So the direction we decided to go in was, the goal was to use open source tools in the SOC instead of the commercial products that we were going to burn 3 to 4 million a year on. And the goal was to try to make an open source SIEM, or what's sometimes called a security information and event manager. Because that was one of the requirements for the SOC, is the SOC wanted to have a SIEM or a SIEM-like tool in order to do their work. We needed to support a lot of all the major popular use cases for SIEM, like you see here, and we'll go through those one at a time. The other requirement I had is I wanted this to be semi-agentless, because it's hard to get to an agentless world in order to get all the data that you really want, that I like to have. It's hard to be really agentless. But I wanted to at least get to a very lightweight agent footprint, because I wanted to stop spending time on troubleshooting agents. Troubleshooting agent interoperability problems, agent performance and reliability problems, agents that fail and take applications down with them, and associated SEV 1 emergencies and emergency support work associated with that. Not only because operations wanted to get rid of that work stream, they wanted more reliability there, but also because the security team wasn't equipped to kind of try to do that 24/7. So this is what our end solution looked like. So first of all, the log analytics platform is replaced by an ELK stack. Now, I imagine there's probably some people using ELK here. ELK stands as an acronym. It's Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. I'll actually show you a live demo of what an instance looks like. So that takes the place of the log ingestion and analytics platform. And then the data source, the primary data source is at the bottom. So we have So from Windows, we take sysmon events. Sysmon is a new audit log that was introduced in Windows some years ago that gives you incredibly rich detail about almost everything that's happening on a Windows host. We take system logs like application, system, and security event logs. We take Windows Defender logs, which give malware detections. And then the Linux world, in the Linux world, we have OS Query, and we use OS Query. But to that, we started adding Audit D data, because Audit D, if anybody use Audit D? So few people. Audit D is almost like the sysmon equivalent for Linux. Gives you an incredibly detailed record of process executions, user commands, network connections, almost any syscall that takes place. So Audit D, and then we take system logs for things like authentication and sudo activity and anything else. We'll take flow logs. In our case, we're taking flow logs from a VPC in a cloud environment. You could replace that with NetFlow in a terrestrial or non-cloud environment. Firewall Ids Events. The IDS events we took from Suricata. There's a couple of options here. There's Suricata and there's Bro. Is anybody using Suricata? Anybody using, I imagine there's how about Bro? I imagine there's a few Bro users here. So I use, now either one they're both great. I use Suricata only because my security team, my folks were more familiar with Snort than Bro, so Suricata was relatively familiar and it was an easy transition from them. And then finally, CloudTrail. If you're doing this in an AWS environment in the CloudTrail event log, audit log is really useful because not everything is going to be seen by either host or network activity. If somebody's persisting in the control plane itself or doing something strange, you really need the logs from the control plane, whether it's CloudTrail or Stackdriver in Google Cloud or the Azure equivalent. And so this is kind of a high-level diagram. So all this data, the way that ELK works is, all of this data is streamed into a Logstash listener or Logstash collector by various means. Some of it comes in by syslog, some of it comes in from agents that gather this and send it as JSON. Some of it is a pull model. We have to connect out to like an S3 bucket and read data from there for some of the AWS data types. But basically, so all this data is gathered by Logstash, goes through a series of transforms in order to parse the log messages into fields. So we have fields like source IP, dest IP, username, et cetera, and can normalize those fields across event streams. And then all of that normalized data gets saved into an Elasticsearch data store, which is a really, really big service for handling really, really large amounts of data and messages. And then finally, Kibana is the user interface. Kibana is not exactly a SIM tool, but it's a SIM-like user interface into the data. Allows you to run searches and visualizations and hunt for threats and run reports and all the things that the SIM users want to do. So how are we on time? So we're good. So in terms of use cases, that's an unfortunate color choice in the font, but what it says on the left is, these are actually, and I'll share these afterwards, but so these are actually, these are the SIM use cases that were defined by Antoine Chavakin at Gartner, who's an analyst at Gartner now. He spent a lot of time in the SIM and the log analytics world, and now he's at Gartner. And so these were the major use cases that I had to solve for. And what I found that, if you asked me, say, 5 or 6 years ago, I'd say we might not be able to do all of these in open source tools. But the fact is today, the ELK stack has become so mature and so robust today that now out of the box, obviously, out of the box, none of the open source log analytics tools will do these turnkey, but with a little bit of work and development, I find you can actually do all of these. And so let's take them one at a time. So these are authentication alerts. So here we're taking authentication events from Linux instances, Windows instances, also taking authentication events from web servers like Nginx and the like. And so here you want to do things, we're looking for things like anomalous authentication activity, like the same user is logging in from Washington and from Romania at the same time. Geographic time-based anomaly detection, suspicious activity is really easy to do, really productive in my experience. Malware detection. So we can do this several different ways. So on the top here, the first event is a detect coming from Windows Defender on a Windows instance. And the bottom list is a set of malware detects coming from a Suricata instance that are basically looking for malware doing beaconing or C2 across the network. In terms of validating IDS alerts, so these are These are IDS alerts from Suricata on the bottom. So we had an IDS alert for some suspicious web activity, somebody actually going out and doing a get by curl. And on the top we have Ids events. And what's interesting about this is, or sorry, actually, these are, actually no, I'm sorry, it's backwards. So on the top we have a Suricata IDS alert on suspicious outbound web download activity. The bottom we have Ids events. And what's useful about this is, so we're looking at the IDS alert, we see that, hey, it looks like somebody went out and downloaded something via curl. And that's interesting, but you know, that could be a dropper for a malware detonation, or it could be various things, or it could just be a human, an ops person going to get a piece of code or a data dictionary. It could be something innocent. It could be an application that uses curl to go and call APIs and web services. So what's useful about the Ids data is Ids in the bottom tells us, yes, it was wget or curl, but it also tells you the URL that was connected to, and it tells you the name of the user who did it. So there's a lot more information there in terms of trying to investigate IDS alerts and make a decision. Flow data. So these are visualizations of flow data. These are actually flow logs from a VPC. We can do the same thing with NetFlow. Do all kinds of flow-based visualization analysis from geographic to port-based to traffic shape to byte counts, and you know, lots of others. Almost anything I think that the NetFlow or flow analyzers do, we can do in Elk and Kibana. So tracking system changes. So this is kind of interesting. So this is actually a CloudTrail event called Modify Snapshot Attribute. And the reason I picked this one is, anybody read there's been some indictments related to the intrusions and the DNC that took place. One of the indictments that came out, I think earlier this year, talked about the investigation into the intrusion into the DNC, or the Democratic National Committee. And one of the things that I noticed in there that surprised me was that when they came to time to start exfilling data, they did it in a way that I'm not sure that many of us had thought about before. So they actually, if the indictment is correct, the attackers actually started sharing snapshots. So a snapshot is like it's almost like a VMware snapshot, but it's not exactly, but it's basically like a disk image of a point in time of a virtual machine in AWS. So the attackers started sharing the snapshots with their account, which is a supported feature. And they basically just shared all these snapshots they could find in order to just exfil all this data in bulk back to Russia or whatever it was going. So this is actually the CloudTrail event that you get when somebody shares a snapshot, when they modify a snapshot permissions to share it with another account. And you can actually see, it's partially redacted, but the destination account number is in the lower red box. So this is something that if we were doing real-time monitoring and alerting on this, we could alert on this. And if somebody could jump on this and say, hey, why are snapshots being shared with some account we've never seen before, then depending on how fast you can react, you might be able to shut this down. These are Nginx events. So web application attacks. So we used OSSEC for this, as a lot of people do. OSSEC is really good at this. What we found, though, is that because OSSEC is largely doing log analytics, we could actually do most of what it does natively by writing our own searches in the web logs. And so we did. So we were able to do, I think, most of what OSSEC does just by doing analytics on things like web server and web application logs. Cloud activity monitoring. So these are analytics on the CloudTrail data. So looking for anomalous activity. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do here. And then finally, threat intelligence. So one of the big requirements that my team had was for threat intelligence. Suricata actually, turns out, does have threat intelligence feeds and integration. It does give you threat intel events. We can add, obviously we can add any sort of threat intelligence we want. If we have threat intelligence subscriptions, we can bring that in to Elasticsearch, Kibana, and do correlation with those. And then finally, endpoint detection and response. So these are, and so word about these. Here's an illustration of, a couple of illustrations of why I wanted to have Ids data. So these are flow logs. And these are flow logs, and one of these flow logs, one of these flows is actually from It's from a persistence mechanism. It's from netcat exporting a command shell from a web server that's been hacked. So, but which one is it? Looking at these, it's not always that easy to make a decision from the information that we get here. It's not always that easy to make a decision about which one of these is the intrusion or which one is the one we want to investigate. So if we look at the same thing in audit D data, anybody see it here? So it's right. So it's the ninth one down. You can see the netcat execution, and then you can see that netcat actually executed, and then it made a connection. And then these are actually in descending time order. So you can up at the top, you can actually see the commands that were running the shell, like somebody ran cat etsy password. So that's great because there's so much more information here in order to make a quick decision as to whether this is something worth investigating or not. And obviously, with this amount of detail, there's so many things we can readily detect. Like, for example, here's another one. Here's a set of flow logs, and one of these is data exfil. One of these is data being copied somewhere else. Which one is it, though? We can look at things like destination ports, right? But SSH port activity in my environment was supernumerary. It'd be really hard to find the one connection in a million that was suspicious. We can look at things like byte counts, but if you have tools that use SSH to manage instances and transfer data around, it's going to be hard to try to find the good from the bad there too. So here it is again. These are audit D events. Which one is the exfil? Somebody said SCP, so yeah, it's basically the sixth one down. And this is great. So now we know that, yes, it wasn't SSH, it was SCP. Somebody's copying files. We know the name of the files that were copied, that we know where they went, and we know the user who did it. So we can go ask the user, hey, is this normal, or what's going on here? These are Windows events. These are sysmon events. You can see that sysmon, for example, gives us a record of process execution, among other things. So in here, it's found that this is actually Mimikatz, which is a tool for extracting passwords that's trying to look like it's part of Windows. So it's been renamed to, for some reason, it's been renamed with two extensions to wmi.exe.exe. There. So we could find that a couple of ways. We could find that based on the name or the path or the hash or a Windows Defender event. But let's talk about something more interesting. Now, so all 9 of these use cases are actually, I think, are pretty easy to do. Well, I wouldn't say easy, but all 9 of these use cases can be done. However, there's one kind of big popular use case that's missing here. Don't say blockchain, because it's not that, right? But what are we missing? A dashboard, I'll show you. No, so machine learning, right? So machine learning is the thing everyone's excited about, and I think it has great potential. Now, machine learning, there are open source tools to do machine learning with. That's a bit more work to get up and running with those, and I'm not going to try to go into that here. However, I want to leave you with something that you could actually leave here and use today, and that because it turns out that there is one algorithm in the open source version of ELK called the significant terms aggregation, and it was originally designed as, and the reason that they use this analogy is they describe it as, when they describe how it works, it's a statistical algorithm that tries to find heat differentials between background and foreground terms and sets of data. So it was originally designed for fraud detection, but it turns out it's pretty good at things like threat hunting as well and finding anomalous activity. So for example, the CloudTrail issue with the snapshots is a great use case for this, I think, because that's a case where because if we know what we're looking for, then chances are we can easily, readily write rules and searches and visualizations to detect the threats that we know we need to look for and detect. The problem is, what do we do about the things that we don't know to look for, the things that somebody's going to think up and try something new next week or next year, and we're not going to alert on it because we've never thought of it before. So that's a use case, like for example, in the case of the CloudTrail incident, if we're doing anomaly detection with an aggregation like this, looking for anomalous commands or anomalous command username or anomalous command and source IP address tuples, because you need to use this on tuples or data pairs. And you potentially find, what it would do is it could potentially tell you that, hey, here's a command I've never seen before, or here's a command I've never seen from this user before, which is really interesting. Another example, if you run this on things like Linux processes, it's actually pretty good at it. Like here, it's found the netcat process, the persistence mechanism, and it's found the data exfil, the SCP activity, both of which were, they had only occurred between 3 and 4 times, so they were very rare, and so they stood out as anomalous. Same thing for network data. Here it found, if you do this on things like process and network activity, I find that the human activity tends to percolate to the top. It's pretty good at finding that, hey, here's human activity that is really unusual. May or may not be an actual threat, but it's unusual and therefore interesting. In this case, it found a couple of downloads. It found somebody running TCP dump. It found a download via curl, and then it found somebody installing a Python module. So for Windows events, here's another one. In this case, this is actually Mimikatz renamed to Google Update.exe.exe, again with 2 extensions. I'm not sure why. But here it's found it because the combination, because sysmon gives us hashes. If you turn it on, sysmon can give you hashes for processes that execute on a Windows host. Sysmon will give you the hash of the image file. So here it's found that, hey, this hash and process name combination is really rare and unusual. And in fact, because it's not actually what it claims to be. So this is a great way of, say if we don't know, because we don't always know, well, what's the name of the malware file going to be, what path is it going to execute from, et cetera. We can't know that in advance. So this is I'm finding this is great potential for finding malware. So questions and time. How much time do we have, by the way? We have 14 minutes. So questions? Yes?
Yeah, do you have data on the actual operational costs you have for your model? I know the 15 slides back to the commercial system, the operational. I would have thought operational would have been a little bit more time.
Sure. So the question is, do we have hard data? I don't have hard data yet, because what's happened is I actually left this job that I was at in order to pursue this full time. I'm now in the process of getting a handful of environments up and running and getting operational with this. They're not in the 20,000 server fleet range at this point. They're environments that are ranging more between 3 and 10,000 servers. So I don't have hard data yet on what this will cost, but as soon as I do, I'll start to share that. In terms of what this looks like, yeah, question? All right, so the question is, could these use cases be met with a more restrictive execution policy? Depending on the environment, yes. If we're talking about a controlled corporate environment where we can apply things like whitelisting policies or restrictive security policies, yes. In my case, running a web property, one of the features of the web property was the ability for customers to develop and run arbitrary programs in certain languages. And so trying to place restrictions on what they could do wasn't necessarily viable. So this is an ELK instance. This instance is running in AWS, and it's connected to a couple of, it's connected to a Windows and a Linux instance that are just acting like honeypots in order to give us live data. So we're bringing in all the data types that I described. So we're bringing in Linux audit D and system logs, Windows sysmon and system logs, bringing in Nginx web server logs, Suricata events, flow logs, CloudTrail events, and all of that feeds into a series of visualizations and alerts. So, for example, these are visualizations on the CloudTrail data. I like to start with visualizations and then drill down into more detailed views. And then this is what, and you know what, the connection has dropped. One moment. While we're reconnecting, this is what the alerts index look like. So in order to do alerts in Kibana, you need a few sidecar tools. So you can use something called Elast Alert, which is another open source project from Yelp. You can use something called 411, which is, I believe, from Etsy, which has a bit of a UI. Either way, we can, so these are alerts that have been generated and sent to an alerts index for review here. What we typically do with these is, in addition to displaying them here, is either send them out to Slack or to Jira via webhook for workflow management in Jira, or we could just do they could just be emailed if workflow is email. But you can do almost any alert workflow with these. This is what the significant terms operator looks like. So here it's doing, in order to use this effectively, it needs to operate on tuples. So it's running on things like usernames and processes and network connections, any kind of data combinations that you can think of. So far with those combinations, I find it's pretty good at finding things like malware, persistence mechanisms, data exfil. There's a lot of kinds of common canonical security detection use cases. I think it has great applications for threat hunting because one of the things people do, like for example over here, and you'll see people do a lot in Windows, is these are the Windows events coming from a Windows instance. And one of the things people will do is they'll start looking at the least frequently occurring processes in order to hunt for suspicious process activity. And that's really useful and it's really productive. But I think that, and, if you have time to do that, though, I think that one of the applications for the significant terms algorithm is we can start to speed that up or start to semi-automate that by using the anomaly detection algorithms to find specific processes without having to necessarily dig through and look at these one by one and try to make judgments about which ones are suspicious and worth investigating. This is an event viewer. So I made a conventional event viewer for both the intrusion detection alerts and for the flow logs in order to be able to work with those. You can create almost any kind of data visualization or representation here in Kibana. This is the Linux data where we have processes and commands. So basically, here's everything that's executing on the Linux instance, both the process name and the command path that it ran. And then we have things like processes and network connections. So we can see things like what processes are connecting to what network destinations. Is there a process, and that's another great case for anomaly detection. So if you have a process, say like in a Windows environment, normally only LSAS or WM or one of the other system processes will connect to a domain controller. If you see anything else connecting to a domain controller, that's often interesting. In the Linux environment, if you know that your automation is based in Python or it's based in Ruby or something else, then you're mostly going to see those interpreters making network connections to APIs. If you see something else making a connection to an API, or you see something random, or you see one of these interpreters or maybe just a script making a connection out to a remote destination, that doesn't really make sense. It's really useful, and it's interesting, and it's really useful to have these events because, again, just looking at network connections, just looking at things like flow data and IDS alerts, sometimes it's hard to make decisions about whether the activity you're looking at is normal or abnormal. So with the network data, it's really useful to know the process and the command that was attached to the network socket and the name of the user context that ran it. More questions? Yes. Here I am not. So the question is, am I using XPack? XPack is a licensed feature. So XPack gives you some security features, machine learning features, graph analysis, alerting, and a number of features. XPack is not free or open source. Bits of it have been open source, but it's not free. It's a licensed feature. Some of the organizations I work with are using it, and some don't. What you see here, I'm doing this without XPack because my original requirement was to do this using open source tools. So in order to do the alerts, I'm using a last alert, yes.
Is there any room in the cost savings that the cost savings you have? Do you focus any of that to putting money back into the open source tools that you are building your system on?
So the question is, do we have the ability to contribute back? So I think, well, I don't personally have the ability to contribute money back at this moment. However, I think for some of the organizations that I'm working with, I think that's possible. That may be possible.
But any contributions through any means, documentation, feature requests, bug finding, things like that, documenting any of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
When you are selling this to your clients, are you selling them on contributing back to the stack that's making them money?
So, yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. Definitely encourage that. I try to contribute ideas and enhancements back to the project wherever I can, and I think my intention is to eventually to open source all of what's been done here at some time in the future. Probably not until next year, but I do want to explore moving in that direction. We have time for one or two more questions. Yes.
Without XPack, you basically don't have any user authentication on this, correct? So I can just kind of go on the instance if I want to test.
On this instance you see here, give it a try. There is an authentication layer in front of this Kibana instance. You didn't see it because I logged in before I started the demo. So we're using, in this case, this is a demo. So I'm actually using an Nginx proxy with no default website and no HTML content. The Nginx, it just acts as a proxy. It proxies connections. It listens on TLS and does basic auth, and then it proxies connections to a Kibana instance behind it. So, yes.
Given that cost estimate between the tooling for commercial versus open source, what about the difference in the labor cost?
The difference in the labor cost is interesting. So the question is, what is the difference in labor cost between commercial products and open source? We believe that we projected that the labor cost would be similar. There may be some savings there in terms of, but the short answer is I don't have data for you on that yet, and I think it's a really interesting place to measure in terms of is there a cost differential one way or another, because there's some savings in terms of there's some savings by eliminating product sprawl gives us some savings that we're managing fewer products and we're spending less time in the tool purchasing and management work streams. But there's some operational cost in terms of getting open source tools operating at scale. The training cost for some of this stuff is a bit less because there are training options out there that are priced below in ranging between $500 and $750. There's some basic training options available for many of these tools, so it's relatively inexpensive to get up and running. Because these are open source tools and they're so accessible, it's sometimes possible to use slightly less expensive team members. Like you may find it's more feasible to use interns or team members that don't necessarily cost as much as a senior security person if they've had experience with these tools in college or if they've just gone and learned them on their own and they already can make some of this stuff work. But to answer your question, it'd be really interesting to measure the cost delta between proprietary and open source, and that's one of the areas where I want to develop more data. We have time for one more, I think. Who's first? Okay.
So, how do you overcome the typical objection of basically open source tools, open source tools like Flax or?
So in our case, we were supporting this ourselves. We had the ability to support this ourselves. However, if for an organization that doesn't necessarily want to go that route, you don't actually have to do it yourself. You can actually contract for the Elk stack. You can actually buy support from the Elastic product. There's actually a commercial vendor behind it. You can actually buy support from them. You can also use a number of services. There are at least 2 or 3 different Elk as a service SaaS offerings where you can consume it on a SaaS basis and you don't have to operate it yourself. We have 1 minute left. So yes.
Follow up on both of these questions. So the efficacy or the performance of the cost versus risk solution, mean time to detection, remediation, what are you seeing as far as how to perform?
So mean time to remediation, or I like to talk about mean time to know, that's another case would be really interesting. I think that in general, our productivity, our speed, our response time, and our productivity in the SOC was higher because we were spending less time on managing tools and more time on doing analysis and threat hunting. We were able to build pretty much almost any kind of search, analytics, or alert that we wanted to, we were able to do without limitations imposed by limitations of the tooling. So it was definitely, the response time and mean time to know was definitely better. That was one of the things that kind of sold me on it, was if we can get faster, if we can go faster and have better results at lower cost, then it became very interesting. And we are out of time, but I will stick around. Thank you for coming to my talk.